What's the research about curiosity as we age? And there's really interesting work that's being done by a lot of people on curiosity as adaptive aging. It's like how you age well is by figuring out how to remain curious in your life, being very intentional about choosing to be curious, actually. Well, and just asking yourself, like, why do I believe that? Do I actually believe that? Or was I simply raised with that as a statement?
It can get real uncomfortable, though, can't it?
It
to
can.
Question your beliefs.
It can.
I say that, I made that sound like it's real easy, but
it's not. No, it's not at all. It's not at all. And it's hard work, but it's also really important work, I think. And, I used to say to my kids, it's okay if it's hard. Like, that's not a reason not to do it. Mm-hmm. It is something that's really worth giving ourselves credit for doing, because not everybody does the work.
Yeah.
But you can tell when people have, and curiosity is a way to do that work.
Welcome to Late Bloomer Living, the podcast where we're all about shaking up our ideas about what it means to grow older. I'm Yvonne Marchese, your resident age agitator and play instigator. Around here, we believe midlife is the perfect time to play, to reinvent, and bloom like you mean it. Let's go. What if curiosity isn't something that we feel, but something that we choose? Lately, I've been thinking about curiosity more and more, and I've really started to see it as a superpower. It's something I'm still learning to develop as a superpower, but the more I practice it, the more I realize how powerful it is for me personally. Curiosity has this way of pulling us out of fear, pulling me, I'll speak for myself, pulling me out of fear and judgment, anxiety, and helping me reconnect with who I really am. And I think it has that power for everybody, I would venture to say. When I came across today's guest, I thought, oh, yeah, she gets this completely. Lynn Borton is the host of the radio show and podcast Choose to Be Curious, and she's been exploring the art of curiosity for years now. Her own journey began with a health scare that pushed her out of her comfort zone, we'll say, and she hasn't looked back since, I think. We'll ask her about that. I'm really just so excited to talk to her about what it means to choose curiosity, and not just as something that we do occasionally, but as a way of being that can completely change how we see ourselves and the world around us. If you've ever wondered how to bring more wonder back into your everyday life, this episode is for you. So stay with us. You're about to discover why curiosity just might be the most life-changing habit of all. So, okie dokie, without further ado, here's Lynn Borton. Lynn, thank you so much for being with me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
I am too. Can you take us back to the moment when curiosity became such a powerful force in your life?
I have to go in the Wayback Machine.
Okay.
I was raised by parents who really encouraged my curiosity. But one story that I tell that was sort of the first moment where I kind of realized that I had what I call a curiosity practice that my dad had given me was Easter. We were at my grandparents' house in the garden hunting for Easter eggs, which was the family tradition. And my dad kind of tilts back on his heels and he kind of says, if you change your point of view, you'll see something new. And I'm like, what's my point of view? What is it? I was 4, maybe 5. Right. And I didn't know really what he meant, but I started looking around. And there, nestled in the crook of this crabapple tree, was this whole stash of chocolate-wrapped eggs.
The mother
and
lode.
I suddenly, yes, the mother lode, right? And I suddenly realized that by changing how I was looking at or for things, I would find new things. And that became a family refrain, but it also became a personal refrain. And if I had to go back to a moment, that's the moment at which I realized this was a choice we could make. There are ways of doing this and kind of prompts we can give ourselves that make it easier And there's chocolate eggs as reward
And
for
who doesn't
doing
love
it.
that? What a great gift from your dad and your mom, I'm guessing too.
Both. Yeah.
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 That's
I
such a
actually told
gift.
somebody the other day, she said, they say curiosity killed the cat, you know? What do you have to say about that? And I said, well, they say all sorts of things, but my mother says curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. So I'm going with mom on this one. So yes, it was a gift, a tremendous gift from both of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you've said that a health scare was a wake-up
Yeah.
call that pushed you to start choose to be curious. And
Yeah.
what was the progression of that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I was in a major leadership role in a national nonprofit organization, chief operating officer of a national group, like 1,000 affiliates around the country. And it was basically my job to know everything. But I came to realize that I was better at the job if I didn't know everything and if I was curious. Now, my parents aside, I was very reluctant to get to that place because, you sort of like your expertise and you like, being the smart person in the room. But I began to realize that things went better when I was curious instead of, pretending to be all knowing. Who can possibly know everything, right?
Mhm.
And then I thought, well, there must be research about this. I can't be the only person who's discovered that curiosity is kind of useful in my work life. And so I made myself a student of curiosity. And then I had a series of kind of weird health issues that kind of piled up over the course of one spring in 2014. And it culminated in a very abrupt total hysterectomy, which revealed cancer.
Mm.
And luckily, I had good health care. I had an understanding employer. I had an easy recovery. I went back to work after 6 weeks. I was like, yes, I'm back. And then I stopped. And I thought, so many people do not have the good fortune that I've just had. I feel like I owe it something more than the same old, same old. And
Mm.
we were just writing the last tuition check for college for our younger son. And my husband was within, a couple of months of eligibility as a federal employee from retirement. And we kind of looked at one another and said, we put off a lot until later. What if later is now? And we just decided we would both quit our jobs and do something different. Now, his plan was to write a
Wow.
book.
Uh-huh.
My plan was to get a plan. And so I spent a year just trying all sorts of things. Polar bear plunge. I like took a statistics modeling class that made me dust off my calculus from like a million years before. And I decided I wanted to do a talk, like a TED talk in our community, but much less intimidating. And but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do it on. And I thought, oh, I want to do it on curiosity. Like I'm learning things. I'm not an expert, but I want to share what I'm learning because it's so interesting to me. And so I did that, and it was really fun. And people came up and they're like, what are you going to do next? I'm like, no clue. This was a one off. But that very same day, I learned that there was a radio station launching in my community. And I thought, oh, that's cool. I'll go check that out. That's kind of interesting. And they were looking for people to do programs. And, I went off, I did other things. But a couple months later, I was like, this is still sitting with me. And I thought, I'm going to pitch a radio show. I had never done radio, didn't know the first thing about audio production. You know what this is like, right?
Yeah.
And
I've got the butterflies in my stomach just
I know,
thinking
right?
about that, right? Yeah.
They offered a training class, and I put together a little pitch, and it was like, Curiosity Radio or something. And I kept thinking about like, what is it I'm trying to do here? I mean, why do I want to do this show? Why do I want to have these conversations? And I thought, well, people make a lot of choices in life. And in the end, given the opportunity, I want them to choose to be curious. And that's where the title of the show came from, because I kept coming back to it. It's the whole reason for the show. And then one day they called me and they said, you're in. When do you want to start? I wasn't done training. Like I didn't have anything lined up. They said, give me 6 weeks. Don't let me chicken out. And I've been doing it ever since.
Wow.
So that's the not so short version of how the health scare got me here.
Yeah, it and how cool to have like something that was outside of you, this radio station and this opportunity, and have something to work like calling you into it in a way,
Yeah,
right?
and it was, and I do think it was this sort of sense of I had done this thing, this rather precipitous thing in leaving my job. It was a job I loved. I was really good at it. I
Yeah.
could have stayed indefinitely, but I wanted to change things up. I wanted to open my world. And having done that, I was then open to all sorts of things that I would never have anticipated. I mean, if I'd made a list of 100 things I thought I would do, radio would never have been on it, but here I
Wow.
am.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's kind of how I became a photographer.
really.
Yeah, yeah, that's crazy. It just occurred to me because I had been an actress before I had kids. And
Right.
then after I had my first, later in life, I was 35 with my first child. And after when he was 2, I started to go out and audition again, and I realized I just wasn't interested anymore.
Hmm.
I was done, but it was all I had ever wanted my whole life was that. So I was lost for a long time. Anyway, long story short, I had a second child. I had been working part-time from home and I had needed to go back to work full-time. And I was, for 5 years, I was really like, who am I? What am I going to be when I grow up? You
Yeah.
know, I was pushing 40 at this point, and I got a job, a kind of a random job, and got a promotion within 4 months. And then it was 2008 and I got a layoff.
Hmm.
And I came home from that layoff and I was like, what am I gonna do? I was feeling desperate. I felt unemployable at 40. And
Yeah.
my husband said, you're gonna be fine. Sleep on it. And I literally woke up the next morning and I call it a Shazam moment because I just turned to him and I said, I want to be a photographer. It it literally came out of nowhere. I had been trying to take pictures, good pictures of my kids with my little point and shoot camera, failing miserably. But I knew what I wanted those
Yeah.
photos to look like, and I knew what they weren't looking like. And, you know, I bought my first real camera, enrolled like in a study from home program, and the rest is history,
That's
you know.
great. I love that story.
Um, but it really, like, I don't know, it came out of a type of curiosity, 5 years of wondering, I guess. So let me ask you, what does it mean to choose curiosity?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a whole big debate within the curiosity universe about what curiosity is. I mean, I ask people to define curiosity,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I've
What
done
is
more than three.
curiosity?
Well, depends on who you talk to.
Okay.
And there are lots of different people who study it and think about it from all these different disciplines, and they have different ways of understanding it. And
Uh-huh.
I'm less interested in the one true way to understand curiosity and
Uh-huh.
more interested in just encouraging people to take on ramps, whichever one suits them, towards curiosity, right? So curiosity might be a desire to fill a knowledge gap, or it might be some version of interest, although there's a whole school of in the literature about the difference between interest and curiosity, and the difference between noticing and attention and curiosity. And those things become it's actually pretty interesting to parse those things a little bit about like when does
Hmm.
it tip in to curiosity and what is it that makes us feel curious that has that sometimes it's a wonderful sort of frothy, fizzy feeling. And sometimes it's like a kind of a desperate, I need to know feeling that isn't so good.
Yeah.
And we use one word for all of those things. And maybe we shouldn't, but we do. And so when I think about curiosity, I've come to think of it in terms of when you are choosing to be curious, you are acting on the idea that there's opportunity in the unknown. And I used to
Oh,
say,
I like that.
no, right? I used to say you are acting on the belief that there's opportunity in the unknown, but but I came to feel like belief was too much to ask.
Mm.
Like that
Yeah, I
that's
see
a
that.
that's a big
Uh-huh.
reach, right?
Yeah.
You just need this idea that something good could come of something that you don't know. And I actually think it's a really interesting distillation of all of these different definitions and ways of thinking about it. And I particularly like it at this point in time for us just as a species and as a country in terms of believing that there's opportunity in the unknown instead of retreating into an incuriosity and a fear of
Yeah.
the unknown. And that was my own
I
experience
feel like
personally.
fear, I feel like fear and curiosity, they can't exist together.
Right,
At least
right,
that's been my personal experience. When I get anxious, if I can just say to myself, if I first note, like, I like that you distinguish between noticing and curiosity because I notice that I'm anxious.
right,
And then if I can just remember to say to myself, oh, that's interesting. I'm
right.
anxious about that. And the minute I say it's interesting, I get curious. I get interested. Well, why am I anxious? And when I start to ask why, it's like pulling at a thread. And the minute I do that, the fear and the anxiety, it may not go away completely, but it sure doesn't have the same grip on me than it had before.
Well, and you've given that energy something to focus on, right? You've given it this opportunity to be inquisitive as opposed to just gnaw at you.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I think the research definitely supports this that curiosity is a good antidote for fear, and fear will crowd out curiosity. So you have to sort
Yes.
of push back, right?
Yes.
And sometimes it's
It's
like,
a
oh,
neat
I'm really
trick.
afraid. It's like, what can I be curious about here? You know?
Yeah.
It's not always easy. It's not a foolproof solution, but it's a way of using resources we all have to push back against feelings we all have as well.
Yeah. How do you cultivate curiosity in your own life? Like, do you have a practice for doing that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I do is I ask my guests what their curiosity practices are. It's
Hmm.
literally one of my things I don't always ask, but I usually ask. And I harvest those and I borrow them all the time. I mean, there are all sorts of things that I do in my life now that were gifts from my guests as they talked about curiosity in their own.
It's the best part of hosting
Oh
a
my
show, isn't
gosh,
it?
I know. So
I've
is.
selfishly, I learned so much from my guests. It's great.
Yes. Yes. So I took up what's called urban sketching
Tell me
as a
more.
curiosity practice
Uh-huh.
from a guest. It was this is like go with a group of people somewhere and sit down and just sketch whatever's in front of you, right? Whatever
Uh-huh.
your skills, don't worry about it. Whatever your materials, don't worry about it. Just sit and pay attention to something that interests and excites you that's in front of you. And if you do this with a group of people, 20 people, 20 different sketches, 20 different styles, 20
Mm.
different conversations about how you see this little piece of the world.
Mm.
So, I mean, there are things like that. I mean, I talked once with this was early on with a woman she does like assessments and evaluation, performance evaluation for nonprofits, big grant, programs. And she says,
Uh-huh.
I have all these metrics and all these ways of evaluating and what worked. And she goes, at the end, best question, most important part of the assessment, I ask, anything else?
Ah.
And that has become such a fallback for me because that's where you learn the good stuff. It's
Huh.
always in the second pass around, just sort of asking, what are the things that didn't get covered in the formal ways of tallying whatever the information is? And or with friends, the same thing. It's like you get all the usuals, like, yeah, what else?
Uh-huh.
And then
I love
people's
it.
real lives come out.
I love it. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. You're reminding me of something else, that whole idea of the urban sketching. So, because I'm a photographer,
Yeah.
this translates into I actually really admire street photography.
Yeah.
urban, like catching those, I think they call it the definitive moment. It is when somebody's a street photographer, they're always trying to capture that definitive moment.
Oh, that's a cool
And
expression.
sometimes I think what they'll do, and I wish when I get more time in my life, I'm just going to go hang out in New York and find a place that looks like it's got interesting lines and shadows and light and different things, and then wait. I think what a lot of people do is they'll go and they'll find a zone and then wait for the magic, a
Yeah.
person to walk through, a person in a red coat, a person in something that gives it pop, a repetitive, like three people walking and maybe they're walking in the same way or carrying something the same way. And suddenly, boom, you've got this definitive moment, right? It makes me
Yeah.
think of that. And it also makes me think of a personal project that I did back in 2016, which I now think about it and I'm like, I think that changed my life.
Oh,
It's
that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't realize it was going to do that at the time. I just decided to do a photo a day
Hmm.
with my camera phone, not my big camera. I wanted to use what was in my pocket, and it was a little iPhone 6, and the phone was what it was at the time.
Hmm.
But I was like, what can I do with this tool? And
Right.
what are the limits? And how I just the only requirement I had for myself is that it had to be an interesting photo to me. And
Uh-huh.
then I posted it every day. So that was my accountability. And so it was a really cool experiment that ended up stretching into another year. And
And did you find that you noticed different things, that
oh,
your
yeah.
eye changed and evolved?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. You're good because suddenly I was constantly looking for interesting,
Yeah.
constantly looking for something that would make a photo that I felt was worthy. And sometimes it would be, 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, and I'd go, I haven't done a photo of the day. And I'd have to come up with something. So I'd like raid my kids' toys and get a flashlight and set up some backdrop and make an interesting photo
Yeah. Yeah.
with a
Yeah.
setup of some sort, or whatever I could find around the house. It was a great exercise. And I think it changed my life in because it was a daily
Hmm.
practice and because I had an accountability thing, which was to post to social media every day. And it was just like, it taught me that I could do that.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I had a photographer friend I interviewed on the show, and he teaches photography. And he said that one of the lessons or exercises he gives his students is that they have to take 50 pictures in their kitchen. And I was like, 50 or 100 pictures, I forget. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do
Uh-huh.
this. So I went into my kitchen. I took 100 pictures in my kitchen. Now you have to really work to find 100 interesting, non-repetitive images in your kitchen. But I came to appreciate the light and the geometry and the texture of my kitchen, old little farmhouse, all these kind of quirky little things. And we've since left that house, and I now have this wonderful collection that documents
Ah,
how I became curious about my kitchen. Like I'm opening the dishwasher, looking in the dish rack. I mean, and it's exactly as you say that when you invite the opportunity to be curious, when you just decide, how might I be curious in this context, whatever it is, it's going to be different every time, but every time it's going to be easier and it's going to be richer. Because I do feel like it's like a muscle. You get better at it, it gets easier to do, and things just become more, you notice all kinds of nuance. Like life is richer for my curiosity practice. There's just no question in my mind about that.
yeah. Uh, have you have you found ways that are useful to you to, let's say you're in an anxious moment, or
Hmm.
I don't know, you're driving down the road and somebody's cut you off, or do you have practical ways that you use to pause and get curious instead of like the reaction or the judging?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Walt Whitman actually who said something like, be curious, not judgmental. So that's
Hmm.
just to sort of, okay, how might I be curious about this? Um, I talked recently with a naturalist, an educator whose expression is slow down to the speed of wonder.
Mm.
And
I feel like I've heard that term before, and
well,
I
I mean,
love that.
he may not have coined it, but it's a
Love
way that
that.
he thinks about getting people to pay attention to the natural world, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then once you do that, like you're so hooked on all the like bugs are so cool, or I've discovered I have a preternatural attraction to seed pods. I don't know why, but I just think they're so cool. And
They
I
are
I
cool.
think about what they represent for potential, and
Yeah.
often we see them when they're already spent,
Hmm.
and their purpose has been served, and yet they stay there and they're just part of the life cycle of these plants. And so I slow down to wonder about where this seed fits in the life cycle of something. And I think when you slow down, you create space to not react. It's like the expression, don't just do something, sit there.
I like that. I've never heard
Just
that before.
just give yourself a moment. And I
Yeah.
love this idea of slowing down to the speed of wonder,
Mm,
that requires putting the brakes on the kind of go, go, go of our lives.
yeah. How has your sense of or your understanding of curiosity, has it evolved since you started your show?
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, for one thing, when I first got started, there was some research going on.
Hmm.
And in fact, there was some research that kind of was released right as I was getting interested. And it was sort of just great timing. And it was this whole thing about how people learn better and remember better if they're curious about something, anything, when you introduce them to new information. So if you get, for educators, this was huge, right? You get kids curious about dinosaurs, they'll remember what you were telling them about algebra because you've sort of primed their receptivity and curiosity muscle.
Oh, wow.
So
Cool.
since then, there's been, layers and layers of research that have been done on top of those things. And some of the things that we thought we understood when I got started, people are starting to question or understand differently. So I think of it as more nuanced, more complicated than I did initially. I think
In what way?
there are all sorts of different parts of the brain that light up in different ways when we're curious in different ways. And this is why I think it's sort of an interesting question about whether or not we use this one word to
Mm,
describe this pretty varied array of behaviors and feelings and thoughts. And maybe if we were going to start new today with a lexicon for what those things are, maybe we would use different words. I don't
mm,
know. But I think
hmm.
we're trying to parse that. We're trying to understand, well, what's going on when this is happening? So, for instance, really interesting research about a kind of curiosity. It's called deprivation sensitivity. So, this really desire to like have an answer to something. Like you must fill this gap. You're really sensitive to the fact that you don't have this information. Well, that interestingly makes people
So that's,
receptive.
let me interrupt because I want to
Yeah,
make sure I understand. So deprivation sensitivity, it sounds to me like I think earlier in the conversation you said you can have the kind of curiosity that is sort of wide open and a kind of
right.
curiosity that's more driven.
Hmm.
And this is the more driven
This
curiosity,
is the
kind
more
of like a
driven, like
need
I
to know.
must know this answer. I need to
Uh-huh.
fill a gap.
Okay.
And what that does is it makes you receptive to information, but not necessarily discerning about that information. You
Mm.
just want to fill the gap and you'll fill it any way you want.
So you could go real confirmation bias, like you're just
You
if
can
you've
go, and
already
that's exactly right. That's what the research is showing. It it
ah,
it accounts for a lot of conspiracy thinking, a lot
uh-huh.
of confirmation bias, a lot of sort of closing down, as opposed to, the kind of curiosity I kind of like to promote, which is this sort of more spacious opening. But
Yes,
there's
I
a
always like to say
cost.
question your beliefs.
Yes.
Because if
Yeah.
you question your beliefs, wow, that just,
Well, and just
you
asking
know,
yourself, like, why do I believe that?
yeah,
Exactly. You know, do I actually believe that? Or was I simply raised with that as a
that can get
statement?
real uncomfortable though, can't it?
It
To question your
can.
beliefs.
It
I say that,
can.
I made that sound like it's real easy, but
But it's not. No, no,
it's
it's not at all.
not.
It's not at
No.
all. And it's hard work, but it's also really important work, I think. And I used to say to my kids, it's okay if it's hard. Like that's not a reason not to do it. It
Hmm.
is it is something that's really worth giving ourselves credit for doing because not everybody does the work,
Yeah.
but you can tell when people have. And curiosity is a way to do that work.
Yeah. Is there anybody who stands out, like any conversation from your show, a particular guest, that really shifted your thinking or that stands out just as something that always kind of comes back to you?
I mean, that's like asking me who my favorite child is.
I
I
know.
can't, I can't, I can't. But there are researchers who have really influenced because they've been willing to sort of continue to study this and change their own understandings about what it is that we're looking at.
Mm.
So one of those is Todd Kashdan. He's a psychologist, happens to be here in Northern Virginia where I am. The researcher that was behind this stuff on memory and the sort of priming for curiosity is a guy named Matthias Gruber, who's based in Wales. And he's just now kind of parsing that further and further and looking at the difference between interest in 10 to 12-year-olds and 13 and 14-year-olds and whether or not their interest in new information translates to memory and learning. And for 10 to 12-year-olds, new information, if they're interested, doesn't make any difference in whether they remember it. But 13 to 14 and 14-year-olds, new information, if they were interested, they remember it. They learn it and they remember it better. So there's this really
Huh.
interesting work that's being done on sort of the developmental stages of our curiosity. And, for somebody like me who's well past 14,
Huh?
what's the research about curiosity as we age? And there's really interesting work that's being done by a lot of people on curiosity as adaptive aging. It's like how you age well is
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
figuring out how to remain curious in your life, being very intentional about choosing to be curious, actually.
Yes. Oh, I'm a
Yeah.
believer. I don't know. I don't have the research to back that up, but I am a
I got
believer.
the
And
research. I got the receipts. I mean, it's just, and other people who say, there is a drop off in curiosity in sort of around 65, but people have different researchers say different things about this. Some people say that's because people make suboptimal choices about how they're spending their time at 65
mm, mm,
and they misgauge, they misunderstand what's going to make their life good for them in that final third. Let's put it that way. And
wow.
others who are
Fascinating.
like, people say they're not curious, but when you actually survey and catalog their behaviors, they are doing lots of curious things. They are pursuing many in doing having thoughts and behaviors that we would describe as curious as a third party, as a researcher, but they've internalized this idea that as an older person, they're not curious. And so they tell themselves a story that they're not curious. But the
Uh,
researchers are like, and yet we see you doing all these things that are the hallmarks of curiosity. So some of it is we tell
fascinating.
ourselves a story that does not need to be true.
The stories we tell ourselves are the most important things, I
Hmm.
think. And if we can question the stories, again, question your beliefs. If you can question the stories you're telling yourself, and maybe the story you're telling yourself is useful and helps
Right.
you. And
And
but
maybe
maybe
not.
but maybe not. And maybe like if you can debunk it and tell yourself a different story. Who cares if it's true? If it's still going to serve you, maybe you can make that true. Then
Right.
you step into your own confirmation bias on purpose, perhaps.
And there are a lot of leadership coaches, that kind of thing out there who are doing exactly that, using curiosity in those ways to get people to ask themselves those questions
Mm,
and to, kind of pay attention to what's actually worked as opposed to the stories that people have told themselves and, what lights them up and how do you get more of that? Like what happened that got you there? And let's figure out how you can do more of that, how you can bring more of that forward. Because again, I think so much of this is about intention and a deliberate kind of, I'm going to, I'm going to take control of what I can control in my life. Now, there's lots in our lives we can't control,
right.
but there's more that we can control than we often think.
Hmm.
And being curious about what those things are has been for me just a huge expander. I'm in a stage of life where people's lives are getting smaller. Mine, absolutely not. It's just every week, it's new ideas, new people, stuff I don't understand. I read research papers. I read them 3 and 4 times because I don't understand what I'm reading. You know, pushing myself into those places that are outside my skill set and comfort, but that experience has told me are really rewarding.
Yeah. How do you see, I have to ask this
Yeah.
because I'm in a deep personal inquiry into playfulness,
Mm,
how to allow for more time for play in my life as an access point to joy, and how to be more playful as often as I can throughout my day, whether I'm working or playing or just doing humdrum stuff.
hmm
And how do you see, what do you see as far as a connection between curiosity and playfulness? Do you see a connection?
I mean, the expression that I've used for a long time is to hold things lightly, is to like
Hmm.
loosen your grip, right? And
Mm.
just be a little lighter about things. Don't, death grip onto things is not playful, right? Nor is it
No,
curious.
right.
So it's like, okay, just loosen the grip. And the thing about play, and I really came to appreciate this, it won't air until later. So spoiler alert, this is coming on the show. But I interviewed a guy who created something called the Museum of Failure. And we talked about this very question about play and failure. And the beauty of play is that we fail all the time in play and we
Yeah,
don't worry about it, right? That's
right.
how we build our skills. We like that, right? Our kids would spend endless hours on video games where they were failing constantly, but they were building skills. They knew that. It was fun. They were completely engaged. And so I try to channel that play is an opportunity to get good at failure and to just not be as worried about it. And, one of the things I took away was like, what can I learn from this? It's like then failure becomes a learning opportunity. And there's research about this too, that if you don't fail, you won't learn and your world will stay pretty small because if you're not failing, you're not pushing. You're not
Yeah.
going beyond existing boundaries for yourself, which means they will shrink in on you. So play is a way to push all of those boundaries
So
outward.
failure is success.
Yeah.
Like it's information, right?
Yeah. Play is also just really good for the brain. I
Yeah.
mean, our physiological response to play is really good. It does all sorts of things for our heart health, our brain health, our sleep, all of the things. The body is happier when it has an opportunity to play. And we should remember that.
Yeah. If somebody is listening to this and they
Yeah.
feel, I don't know, stuck or fearful, or let's say they want to try something new, what do you think is a curious question that they could start with?
Well, I mean, you could start with, what could I learn here? Or go to this. What if I acted on this idea that there was opportunity in this unknown?
Mm.
you know, I feel stuck. It feels like there's this big wall up in front of me, or there's something scary over there. I don't know what that is. I don't want to go there. What if you sat and just contemplated the idea that there was opportunity there? And I mean, my own experience is that that gives you a glimmer. It's not going to be lightning strikes and everything is unicorns and roses and all those things, but I don't have a question of it in my mind that there will be a glimmer of a something, and then you just follow the glimmers, you know.
That's on my daily thing is look for the glimmers and follow, like literally like that. That's
Really, I
my
love
daily
it. I love it.
reminder. I have a note to myself constantly to look for the glimmers. And
I did not know that, but see, it must be
yeah,
true. It
it,
must be true.
it's true for me. I mean, I don't know, it's working. How do you hope that the work that you're doing and your way of being curious will inspire other people?
Yeah, I mean, I realized I really wanted to do this, and I wanted to keep doing this. I'm coming up on 10 years, and so that's, got me thinking a little bit about kind of what's next, and do I want to keep doing this? Do I want to keep doing it in the way that I've been doing it? And part of what brought me to it was this concern that we live in a kind of incurious time. And I wanted to give people on ramps, ways to be just a little more curious. And so it's amazing to me when I get emails from people or, people reach out on social media and they're like, I do this thing now because of this conversation that you had with so and so. Or here's the thing, people send me news clippings, anything about curiosity, I get like 6 or 10 of them from different people literally all over the world. Now,
That's
I thought
awesome.
of you when I saw this. And to me, that's huge because it means that now curiosity has risen to a level of attention. They've noticed
Hmm.
it, they've paid attention to it. And my hope is that they themselves become a little curious about it, that we get past the just noticing to, oh, I could do that too. And here are the ways that I'm doing this in my life. And that people feel what I feel, which is that their lives they're more resilient, they're more spacious, and that it takes them places they just would never have expected they would go. And so that to me is success for the show.
So I'm going to ask you that question that you mentioned earlier. Anything else?
So it's interesting, I'm thinking about this question of kind of what's next. And I had an interview quite recently, actually, with a guy who talked about the importance of sharing our successes and people asking those questions. And I had this kind of epiphany from that conversation that I was going to do this reflection and sort of thinking about this. And I'm like an introvert. I'm like all in my own head. And I'm thinking, this is something I need to do for myself. And what I realized was I need to do this in community with other people. And so I'm thinking about what that looks like and how that might be. And I'm just sort of waiting with an open heart and open hands to see what comes. And I'm thinking about how do I reach out, not just passively wait, but how do I reach out for that? So I think that's a really important lesson for me. And I think it's an opportunity for other people to think about as well.
Yeah, you're getting curious about what's
I'm
next.
choosing to be curious about choose to be curious. How very
So
meta.
meta. Oh my goodness, that's awesome. Where can people find you, find your show, give a
Yeah.
listen?
Choose to be curious.com and wherever you find your podcasts. Or if you happen to live in one of the 25 or so communities around the country that carry me on the radio, I'm on non-commercial community radio stations in various parts of the country. And if you have a non-commercial radio station, let them know they could have Choose to Be Curious on the airwaves there too. So
That's very
come find
cool.
me.
Very cool. Ah, thank you so much for being here. I just love this conversation.
Yeah, likewise.
And I'm just more, I'm even more convinced that curiosity really is one of the most powerful tools that we have for growth at any age. That it's what keeps us open, flexible, and connected to wonder, the wonder of being alive, the everyday miracles. And it's easy to think that curiosity is something that we naturally have or don't have, I think. But as you've shown us, it's clearly something we can choose moment by moment. So thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that it's important to choose it moment to moment. It's not just that we can do it. It's actually important that we do it. I think our lives and our society depend on it.
perfect way to leave it. Thank you. That is seriously, it is. I think it is. I'm in 100% agreement with you. If you're listening today, thank you for being here with us. And if the conversation sparked something for you, maybe that's your invitation to follow your curiosity a little more closely this week. Notice what makes you light up. Ask a different question. Try something new just to see where it leads. Lynn, just thank you so much for reminding us how powerful it can be to stay curious. Um, if the conversation made you think of a friend who would love it, share the episode with them. It's one of the best ways to help people discover these stories. Be sure to check out Lynn's podcast, Choose to Be Curious. I'll link it in the show notes as well. And of course, don't forget to subscribe here at Late Bloomer Living so you don't miss out on the next episode. And until next time, stay playful, stay curious, and bloom like you mean it.